Your next assignment, you're going to be analyzing a visual argument. So far we have been evaluating and analyzing written arguments, and essentially visual arguments are really just as important, and we ask the same questions of ourselves when we do those. So a visual argument can make an argument in the same way that a text can. Oftentimes the argument may be more symbolic, and really that can make it more impactful. If you notice the picture on the right of the screen, you'll see the polar bears. Think about what sort of argument is this making. There's no text on this particular picture. So you have two polar bears, one might be a cub, sort of out in the middle of the ocean. What sort of environmental statement is this making? What sort of emotions does it invoke in you? What kinds of questions do we ask ourselves in order to look at that argument and decide what it means? One of the things when we look at visual arguments is we can talk about the power of contradiction, sort of what we are supposed to see versus what is actually there. So in this particular photo, we're looking at disruption. So what are the opposing images that you see? Essentially, we start out with, a happy couple. It's their wedding. They're smiling. They're dressed up. In the back is a hurricane. And so really the message comes through from the contradiction that's in the picture itself. And you can see at the bottom of this one, it does include text. So ignoring global warming won't make it go away. So essentially, it's like this married couple ignoring the major problem that's happening while they get married. So a visual argument, like an evaluation, we have to talk about what sort of criteria we'd use. And really, there's a set of things we want to look at. The first is the composition. What elements is the visual composed from? So you can ask yourself questions like, what is the focal point? What are your eyes drawn to? What's the biggest image? From what perspective do you view the focal point? Are you looking straight at it, maybe straight into the subject's eyes? Are you looking down on top of the scene? What other sorts of effects are used in the pictures? What kinds of colors? Sometimes no color can be a statement, sometimes contrasting colors, additional graphical elements, or any sort of enhancement to the photo which takes it out of the reality. So how do those elements contribute to your reading of the visual? We also want to look at people, other main figures. So in the polar bear one, those aren't people, but the main figures are the bears. What do you notice about them? Are they isolated? Who are they looking at? What is their ethnicity, their profession, their attractiveness? What parts about the subject indicate their socioeconomic class? Okay? And then how do these factors relate to the image of the photo? How do they relate to the argument? How do they support the argument that the visual might be making? Who are they looking at? Are they looking at each other? Are they looking at the viewer of the photograph? Are they looking off to the side? You can also notice the subject's facial expressions, body language, any type of power relationships. Do they seem equal, subordinate, subservient? Next, we look at the scene. What's in the background? What's in the foreground? Do you recognize what's happening? What's happened just before the image is shot? What will happen next? And in fact, the image of the polar bears, that image has been cropped to make it look like they're sort of out in the middle of the ocean with the polar ice melting, where in reality there was a connection there. But so sometimes there's something missing from the photo. What's right outside of the visual frame? Who is the subject of the photo looking at? Those are all the things that you want to take into account. Finally, are there words added to the visual? Okay, so is it text and visual? What role do the words play? Is it a famous quote, a song, a slogan? How does that help you to interpret the overall meaning? Sometimes those words can be direct. Sometimes the words can be as symbolic as the image itself. Finally, you can also look at tone. So the words could have a tone, but the picture itself could have a tone. Is it lighthearted, somber, frightening, shocking, joyful? Okay? And so you're going to look at all of these elements and figure out how do they support the argument that's being made. Visuals appeal to audiences in the same way as writing. So always ask yourself, what is the purpose? Is someone trying to sell me something? Or is it trying to be like public service announcement? Are they trying to persuade me to change my attitude about something? So what is the purpose? Who's the target audience? Just as we talk about in text that we have target audiences, visuals also have target audiences. How does the evidence that the visual used, how does it appeal to the audience? Next, we want to look at the author. Who took this picture? What was their purpose? Where were they? Where was it published? Is it online? Is it in an advertisement? Was it part of National Geographic? Right? So those are all very important questions about rhetorical context. And finally, you have to look at social context. What's the immediate social and cultural context that the visual operates in? Is it in a different country? Is it in this country? Is it in a school? What community does it belong to? What's the historical context? What does the audience already know about this picture? What sort of preconceived notions might they have? And then finally, and here's a word you probably have not heard before, it's called intertextuality. So how does the visual connect or contrast with other forms of argument? And those forms could be written or they could be imaged. So in other words, we're looking at like what is the connection between the visual you're looking at and other arguments that are made, whether those be written arguments or other visual arguments. How does it respond? How does it function within that conversation? Who is it responding to? Because we know lots of times that arguments, they don't simply happen in a vacuum. They happen in a conversation. And so who is a part of the conversation? So finally, here's a very famous photo. This is called Afghan Girl. It was published in National Geographic. And it's considered she's considered the Mona Lisa of the third world. This photo was taken quite a while ago, but it's really become representative, of that country. She has beautiful eyes. And so you can really look at those different historical contexts, the social context. If we look at her as a subject, right, we see beauty, we can see social class, probably a little bit of poverty. What are the things that you notice about this picture?